In April 2018, something happened that the official crypto narrative says never occurred. XRP flipped Bitcoin. Not briefly, not in a single exchange. In terms of total market capitalization, the metric the entire industry uses to rank assets, XRP surpassed Bitcoin and became the most valuable cryptocurrency on Earth for 3 days. And then overnight, without announcement, without explanation, CoinMarketCap quietly removed Korean exchange trading volumes from its calculations. The flip disappeared from every chart, every ranking, every historical record that casual observers would ever reference. But it did not disappear from the blockchain. The transactions happened. The volumes were real. The ledger recorded everything. Here is what that event actually proves. Not about price, not about rankings, but about the people who felt threatened enough to erase it. You do not quietly delete data about something that doesn't matter. You delete data about something that matters enormously. And in 2026, 8 years later, every single piece of infrastructure that made that flip possible is still being built, while the people who deleted the data are now hedging against their own asset failing. Welcome back to XRP News Flow Signals, where we read the data that survived the deletions. This is not financial advice. Always do your own research. But if you want to understand why 2018's erased flip is directly relevant to what is happening to Bitcoin's narrative in 2026, and what both events mean for XRP's structural position right now, stay with me. Let's start with the hard truth that the 2018 deletion reveals about the nature of the competition XRP has always been in. When CoinMarketCap removed Korean exchange volumes overnight in April 2018, the effect was immediate and surgical. A metric that showed XRP surpassing Bitcoin was replaced by a metric that did not. No explanation was given. No methodology change was announced publicly in advance. The data simply changed, and with it, the historical record that would be cited for years afterward. Think about the decision-making that produces that outcome. Someone with access to the most widely referenced crypto data platform in the world, aware that XRP was 3 days into flipping Bitcoin by market cap, made a choice to change the calculation methodology in a way that reversed the ranking overnight. That is not a coincidence of timing. That is a response. And responses at that scale, responses that alter public historical records, only happen when the thing being responded to represents a genuine threat to something with significant value attached to it. Fast forward to 2026, and the pattern of coordinated opposition that followed the 2018 flip is now well documented. The manufactured FUD campaigns, the regulatory pressure that landed on XRP specifically while Bitcoin and Ethereum received clarity, the SEC lawsuit filed with precise timing. Each event, viewed in isolation, could be explained away. Viewed together, they form a coherent pattern of institutional resistance to an asset that was and remains a genuine competitor to established financial hierarchies. But here is what the 2018 playbook missed. The XRP Ledger kept running. Every single day through the lawsuit, through the delistings, through the FUD cycles, through the years of manufactured uncertainty. By 2026, the lawsuit is resolved. The commodity classification exists. The partnerships are documented. The payment corridors are live. The institutional inflows are measurable. The exchange reserves are at 8-year lows from accumulation. You can manipulate a chart. You can manufacture FUD. You can time a lawsuit. You can change a data methodology overnight. You cannot kill a technology that solves a real problem for real institutions moving real money. The deletion was the most powerful proof that XRP mattered. Everything that followed confirmed it. Now, let's run the numbers that explain why Bitcoin's position as the dominant digital asset is structurally weaker than it has ever been, and why that weakness is a signal for XRP, not just a Bitcoin story. Start with the quantum threat, because this is where the Bitcoin narrative faces its most technically credible challenge. Charles Hoskinson, the founder of a competing blockchain, and one of the most technically qualified voices in the space, stated publicly this week, 34% of Bitcoin's entire circulating supply is vulnerable to quantum computing attacks. That supply sits in addresses that are cryptographically exposed by the nature of how early Bitcoin transactions were structured, including, critically, the Satoshi wallets that hold approximately 1 million Bitcoin that has never moved. When quantum computing capability reaches the threshold required to break that cryptographic protection, a timeline that serious researchers now measure in years rather than decades, those wallets become accessible. The implications are not subtle. 1 million Bitcoin entering circulation from Satoshi's wallets would represent the largest single supply shock in the history of any financial asset. It would happen without warning. It would be irreversible. And it would occur in a system whose entire value proposition rests on the premise that the supply is fixed, and no central authority can alter it. The Bitcoin maximalists who spent years arguing that XRP was compromised because Ripple held XRP in escrow, with transparent, publicly documented, auditable escrow release schedules, are now hedging their own holdings against the possibility that their asset's foundational supply premise could be broken by a computer. The asset they spent years arguing Bitcoin had made obsolete. Now connect this to the broader structural shift being documented this week. Brian Armstrong publicly stated that agentic commerce, machine-to-machine payments, is not yet priced into current digital asset valuations. The agentic economy, where AI systems transact autonomously at machine speed, could exceed the human economy in total transaction volume. And the infrastructure being built for that economy requires settlement rails that operate in seconds, not minutes, at costs measured in fractions of a cent, not dollars. Bitcoin settles in approximately 60 minutes. XRP settles in 3 to 5 seconds. The agentic economy cannot wait an hour for a payment to confirm. It cannot function on a network that processes 7 transactions per second while requiring machine-speed commerce at global scale. The asset that was built for institutional settlement, that settles in seconds, burns supply with every transaction, and whose regulatory clarity is already codified, is not the asset with 34% of its supply cryptographically vulnerable. The math of which assets serve the next decade of finance is not a debate. It is an engineering specification. Now let's talk about the signals this week that show the new financial systems infrastructure is being built on a timeline most retail investors are not tracking. Start with Iraq. The Central Bank of Iraq issued mandatory instructions this week requiring all banks and electronic payment companies to deploy POS terminals within 10 working days, mandating 24/7 e-payment infrastructure, requiring monthly transaction reporting, and enforcing strict data security standards. Iraq is going cashless, not as a future ambition, but as an immediate regulatory mandate. This is not an isolated case. It is part of a global pattern of central bank digital infrastructure deployment happening simultaneously across multiple jurisdictions. While public attention is focused on oil prices, tariff disputes, and Middle East conflict, the infrastructure for the new financial system is being built in the background. Iraq, multiple European nations, Asia-Pacific corridors. The question for XRP is not whether this infrastructure will require a settlement layer. It is which settlement layer will carry the volume when it goes live at scale. Now add the X-Money signal, because this creates a specific competitive advantage for XRP in the near term. Elon Musk's X-Money platform proposed offering 6% annual percentage yield on crypto balances. That proposal is now facing regulatory hurdles specifically because XRP equivalent regulatory clarity does not exist for the assets X-Money plan to use. XRP already has commodity classification. It already has the regulatory framework that X-Money's crypto plans require, but cannot access for other assets. The question the regulatory environment is now forcing is straightforward. If X-Money wants to offer crypto-denominated financial services with legal certainty, which asset already has that certainty? and Scott Bessent's public call this week for Americans to reduce their tax withholding, adjusting W-4 forms to reflect new legislation, represents something structurally significant beyond the immediate wage impact. A Treasury Secretary publicly encouraging citizens to keep more of their income in personal accounts rather than government float is a directional signal about where the administration believes capital should be positioned. It is not a crypto-specific statement, but it is consistent with a broader policy posture that rewards self-custody and personal financial positioning over institutional dependency. The signals are not coming from one direction. They are converging from macro policy, geopolitical infrastructure, regulatory clarity, and technical fundamentals simultaneously. I want to stop here because connecting the 2018 data deletion to the quantum threat to the agentic economy, to Iraq's cashless mandate, to X-Money's regulatory gap as a single structural thesis, rather than a collection of weekly news items, is the analytical work this channel is built to do. If you want this cross-signal mapping in your feed every week, subscribe to XRP News Flow Signals right now and turn on notifications. Because the 2028 timeline I am about to map is not speculation. It is the convergence of infrastructure deployment signals already visible in the data, and you want the framework built before the headlines catch up. Let's map the timeline that the data is drawing, because the 2028 signal is not a prediction. It is a convergence of infrastructure deployment events on a visible schedule. Catalyst 1, Clarity Act passage, 2026. 2 issues remaining from 10+ months ago. Senate Banking Committee markup imminent. When it passes, XRP's commodity status is permanent federal law. The 65% of institutional capital, citing regulatory clarity as the single barrier to allocation, enters the market simultaneously. Catalyst 2, X-Money crypto integration, 2026 to 2027. X-Money's regulatory clarity gap for competing assets creates a specific opening for XRP, the only major digital asset with commodity classification already in place. When X-Money's crypto integration moves forward with legally cleared assets, XRP is structurally positioned to be part of that infrastructure. Catalyst 3, Agentic Economy Infrastructure, 2027. Brian Armstrong's timeline for machine-to-machine payment infrastructure puts the primary deployment phase in 2027. The settlement rail that serves autonomous AI commerce requires the settlement speed and cost structure that XRP was engineered to provide. At 3 to 5 second finality and fractions of a cent per transaction, XRP meets the engineering specification. Bitcoin does not. Catalyst 4, New Financial System Live, 2028. The global cashless infrastructure being deployed simultaneously across Iraq, Europe, Asia, and the Americas converges on a timeline that multiple informed observers now place at 2028. When that system goes live, when CBDCs and stablecoins move between countries in real time, the settlement layer carrying that volume needs to already be proven at scale. The XRP Ledger has been running since 2012. Here is the timeline compression that makes the current moment structurally significant. The new financial systems infrastructure is being built now, not in 2027, not in 2028, now. In the regulatory mandates being issued in Iraq, in the X-Money regulatory gaps being identified in New York, in the agentic economy infrastructure being built at Coinbase, in the Clarity Act compromise language approaching final text. The assets that are positioned inside that infrastructure before it goes live at scale are the assets that benefit from it going live. The assets that are waiting for regulatory clarity that XRP already has, they are not inside the infrastructure yet. The 2028 live date is not the entry point. It is the settlement date. Let me leave you with the frame that connects 2018 to 2026 to 2028. In 2018, XRP flipped Bitcoin. The data was deleted overnight, but the ledger recorded everything and kept running. In 2026, the Bitcoin narrative is facing its most credible technical threat: 34% supply vulnerability to quantum computing. while the asset's maximalist advocates hedge with gold and argue about which mining operation will make the decision for them. Meanwhile, the infrastructure for the next financial system is being built globally. Iraq is going cashless. Coinbase is building agentic payment rails. X-Money needs XRP's existing regulatory clarity to move forward with crypto integration. The Clarity Act is down to two issues. The people who deleted the data in 2018 understood something that their public statements denied. XRP was, and remains, the most credible threat to the financial hierarchy they were protecting. The ledger kept running. 8 years later, it is still running, and the infrastructure being built around it is now visible in the data from every direction. If this historical and structural read changed how you see where XRP stands in 2026, subscribe to XRP News Flow Signals before the 2028 infrastructure goes live. We track the signals building toward that convergence. Every week, before the headlines name what we already mapped. Drop one word below. Ledger if the 2018 deletion story landed as the proof it is. Let's see who has been paying attention. Stay sharp. The signal does not lie. Not financial advice. Always conduct your own research.